Hello.
I felt like a bridge today.
You look like a bridge today.
I noticed hedgehog was on your list. You did a hedgehog.
Yes, he came out very cute.
Yep.
I wonder if you would be willing to let me interview you for that COVID project so that you can tell me about having your grandkids there to do their studying and stuff. Can we? All right, I'll contact you privately.
Okay.
Hi, Isaac.
Hi, how are you doing?
Great, how are you?
Okay,
Got your hair cut.
I did.
We both did. My
Ah.
cousin saw us on a Zoom thing for a minute, and she goes, "I know you cut your hair." I think she remembers it long. She goes, "It's so short," and it was the idea, so we don't have to go back for a long time.
That's very smart.
Okay, let's see. I got your name right now.
Okay, but I need to lean back.
Okay, here.
Yeah.
Here we go. I'm not gonna sit back. We're good.
Well, you can move back a little bit. 'Cause your head's in it.
There's Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hello.
And Abby too.
Where's Abby?
And everybody else
Oh,
that
hi,
we don't know
Abby.
well.
Anybody else we know?
Well, you should get to know everybody.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Hopefully. Well,
Hey,
we're
Lenny.
on a much smaller area today because I need to lean my head back. Something weird happened with my neck, so I didn't want to sit in front of them.
Oh,
We normally put you guys on this big flat screen TV where your heads are huge, you know, but now.
Hey,
no.
Lenny, how are you?
Good, thank you. How about yourself?
Okay, thank you.
Lenny.
And Anne, I did read the second chapter.
Excellent.
Yeah.
It was a lot less complicated than the first one.
I think so too. They made it, I think that they made the first one hard to weed out all the people who weren't really going to make
It
it.
could be, it's sort of like the chemistry 101 of Kabbalah.
Howdy.
Hello, co-host.
Hello. Good to see everybody. Can you hear me clearly?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, sorry to be a little bit late. We are going to look at chapter 2 of the work of the Besht of the Amud HaTefillah, and let me just zoom out for a moment and tell you just to remind you where we are, what our trajectory is. So I want to say a couple of things. So one is that though I build this as a class about the Besht, about the Baal Shem Tov, as I've said previously, really we don't think we have writings of the Baal Shem Tov. What we have is the writings of the many students of the Baal Shem Tov. And these first couple of generations of the Baal Shem Tov really are the progenitors of Hasidism as we know it. They are really, they when we talk about Hasidism, we're talking about these branches that came off of the, if you imagine the Baal Shem Tov as the seed, and then the tree of his teaching grows, and the branches that come off it are really the way that we get to know the Baal Shem Tov. And what's really fascinating about that is that, of course, every teacher of Torah transforms the Torah that they encounter. And so to say that it's a class on the Baal Shem Tov is a little bit of a misnomer. or it may be even a little bit misleading, because really what it is it's a class about the first couple of generations of students of the Baal Shem Tov. And I think, yeah, I mean, in looking at in the Hebrew text in the back of the book, or in the front of the book, depending how you think of it, the citations are much clearer than they are, and he has some weird abbreviations that make it hard to figure out what it is. But if you look at the key in the front, if you're interested in tracking down which teachers you're actually reading in each paragraph, he has a little abbreviation on Roman numeral page 26. So you can track, if you're interested, you can track down what these actually are. But in any event, it's just important to know, because there are cases in which, I think we talked about last time, there might be teachings that seem to be, I don't know, necessarily contradictory, but there's a different, at a minimum, some of the teachings have a different tonality or nuance, and in other cases there's just ideas that don't square. And it's important to remember that that's not necessarily the Baal Shem Tov being paradoxical. It's the fact that you're listening to two different teachers and interpret and express their perspective on what the Besh gave to them. So I just wanted you to be aware of that, and to know that the next thing I'll say is that when you talk about any Hasidic teacher or any Hasidic teaching that you've heard of, like, you've heard me, for example, talk about the Kotzker Rebbe, or you've heard about Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. Any time, the world of Hasidism is finite, and it's anytime you hear any Hasidic teacher being quoted, they are spiritual descendants of what you're seeing in this book, right? So now the Kotzker I took as an example, a kind of far-flung example, because he's a couple of generations, he's a few generations removed from the Baal Shem Tov, but even he would not exist without the Baal Shem Tov and with the teachers that followed the Baal Shem Tov. So you are reading in this class about what that I'm calling a class about the Baal Shem Tov, you are reading about the birth of Hasidism. Okay, so I just wanted you to be aware of that. That's one. Number two is that, just as a reminder, we are zooming in on the Amud HaTefillah of the pillar of prayer. And this is just one little part of the Baal Shem Tov's teachings. And these are teachings that, as you know, are focused around tefillah and in Torah study and the mental states, spiritual states required for study. But this is not all the Baal Shem Tov had to talk about or think about with regard to his offerings of to the Jewish world and to the world of spirituality and religiosity. And we will, after we make our way through the Amud HaTefillah, we will be looking at other aspects of the Besh's teachings on the Torah, etc. And then the last thing I'll say for right now as an introduction is that we are not we're not going to read every single page of Amud HaTefillah. We are going to skip a couple of chapters. Obviously, you're welcome to read whatever you want, but I'm not necessarily going to be focusing on every single chapter, because there are parts of this that are more juicy and parts that are more obscure, and I want to be able to get to other things past this. So you'll see in the reading I give you after for the next time, you'll see that I'm inviting you to skip some chapters. Okay, before we jump into chapter 2, just give me general responses. How is the reading going? Is this illuminating? Is it obfuscating? Fun? Slog? How is it for you?
Better than last week.
Better than last week. Okay. Meaning you didn't like chapter 1.
I loved chapter 1, but chapter 2, I actually understood reading it myself and not having somebody explain it to me.
Got it. Okay, good.
I agree.
Okay.
I always feel, and I've said this to you before, there are straightforward ways of saying it. That is not the way of this book.
Right. That's interesting. So let me ask you a question, and I'm going to put the title in here because Ivan Gold, who I'm delighted to have with us, is new to the class. Translated by Collis. Okay.
I saw it when she held it up.
Oh yeah. So I just put the info into the chat. It's
Collis.
Collis, yeah, Pillar of Prayer. Yeah, it's interesting. So Sarah, you're saying that some of the teachings are more obscure than they might be. You're saying like one could imagine a more direct expression of some of the ideas, yeah?
Yes, you have to work very hard at figuring out, well, the first thing is, what are they actually saying?
Right.
And it's not that it's obfuscation, just that it's not straightforward. No
Right.
one's trying to deceive you, but you have to
Right.
work very hard to figure out the kernel of truth from each paragraph.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And remember that at least part of that, a good part of that is that when you read any Torah, but when you're reading this book, it's like you're walking into a time machine and you're like walking into the yeshiva of the Besht. It's a different language. It's a different culture. It's a different set of assumptions. All of these texts and ideas that he's assuming his audience is familiar with, right? So we are already doing, there's already that challenge. And then the ideas themselves are not easy. So yeah. Other thoughts, other reactions?
I'm just reacting to what Sarah was saying, which is, I don't see how it could be straightforward. We're describing practice, or the teachers in here are describing practices and states of mind that are not straightforward and don't have common language to describe them.
Right. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. That these are not concepts that could necessarily be translated into a simpler language. Some of them could, but that's right. These are things that are in many cases beyond language, but all we have is language. And I think I don't want to go off the rails here into another discussion, but I think another aspect of any study of Jewish mysticism is that there's an implicit teaching in the obscurity of the texts, which is that the texts, whether it's the primary texts that are being examined, like the Torah or the Mishnah or the Talmud, or the teachings themselves, the implicit message is that what you see in the world is not what is really there, right? The world seems to be just a bunch of random physical objects disconnected and without any particular order. But actually, if you know how to look at it right, this is the Kabbalistic assumption, there's actually something very, very, very different at play underneath all of that. And so too, when you look at a certain text, it looks like it's just a bunch of words that mean this, but actually, if you understand it right, it's pointing to something very different. And so there's an analogy, is that the word I'm looking for? An analogy between the text and the interpreter and the person living in the world and the experience of being a person. So I think that sometimes that complication is deliberate. But again, I don't want to go too far down that path because we'll never make it back. Other thoughts? One or two more thoughts as an intro? Okay.
I was going to offer a little more, if it's okay with people, but as you were talking about, like, sort of what's the underlying message of this, one way I would think of it is like everything is in code. Everything you read, everything you see is kind of code for something else. And when you said, like what you see isn't what's there, I was immediately thinking about back in the old days of word processing, it was a big deal when we got to what you see is what you get screens.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
Because, before that, what you would see would be, just like all this really complicated code that you had to like know all these ins and outs of like how to make a paragraph. And then it got translated by people who were amazingly good at this into, all that code, it comes out as words you understand on a page.
Wait, and so is the analogy that these are words you do understand, or this is the code?
These are like halfway to,
Right.
to what I would
Right.
get.
Right,
This isn't
right.
like the basic code, but it's
Right.
also
Nice. Okay, good. So one of the okay, so we're gonna dive in. Thank you for that. That's a really interesting way to look at it. We're gonna dive in. We're at chapter 2, and okay, chapter 2 begins on page, really starts on page 19 of the book. And I will put up my translation here, which I'm doing with a little bit of hesitancy because I haven't really polished it. But there are people here who don't have the book, and so I want them to be able to see something. Whoops, what am I doing here? Give me a moment.
Gosh, don't slow it down for me. I'll get the book and follow on at the next session.
Yeah, no, it's all, you're not alone. There are other folks who don't have the book. Thank you, though, Ivan. For you, I would never slow it down, but for others, I'm just slowing it down. Okay. So, and the other thing to say about my translation is that one of the things I have not done in going back over it is to render it gender neutral, which I try to do when I have the time, but when I'm doing things on the fly, I don't. So parts of this are gender neutral and some parts of it are not. Okay, but why doesn't, oh, sorry, it starts on page 18, not page 19. I was confused. It starts on page 18 of the book. And we talked about this a little bit in the on the Facebook group page for those who are tuning into that periodically. A few of you are. So he says here that he's concerned here with he says one has to be careful with one's words, even with regard to speech in the non-sacred realm. And so we talked about a little bit about the power of this and about the idea that, before you wake up in the morning, like you should really center your thoughts. So one thing I want to just clarify in this teaching. So he talks about there are words. So this is based on a Talmudic discussion, and the Gemara talks about that, one should not speak before prayer. But then, as the Gemara does, it begins to get more specific, and it divides it into like words that are permitted, words that are not permitted. But really, the way to think about this is the words that are permitted. Let me just see how he translates it here. Well, really what he's talking about is there are words that are unnecessary. And when you wake up in the morning, he's saying, don't speak unnecessary words. Okay. And why is that? Why does that matter? I'm now, as not a rhetorical question, I'm actually asking you, what in the best's mind, what's the harm in just getting up and starting to talk? Yeah, Sarah Sturtz, and then Ann Prohl.
There are things that we should be thinking of first and foremost upon awakening. And if what you're thinking about are frivolous words unnecessary, then you're kind of missing that opportunity.
Okay, Ann Prawl, thank you, Sarah Ann.
Well, the words that you say first are the words that are going to set your tone for the day. So the first things that you say should be the words that will bring you closer to God. If you wake up and say something frivolous or, God forbid, rude,
Right,
then that's your day.
right, exactly right. And then to just to build on that, so the world was created through thought, speech, and deed. I mean, like the fourth line down in the English on page 18. Prior to all is thought, and speech is like a branch of thought. So just building on what you just said, Anne, so your words are going to have an effect on your whole day, but really he wants to make it so your thoughts are having an effect on your whole day. So if you center your thoughts, and if you're making your thoughts cleave to God, then that will be reflected eventually in your speech. And that will carry out through the whole day. So one of the reasons that I love this, very powerful teaching is that is just because practically, I find it very, very useful. Like I'm a person who wakes up, and I mean, doesn't have to do necessarily with the spoken word, but I will wake up, especially right now, as I'm kind of, where all of us are caught in this surrealistic surrealistic but all too real political environment that we're living in. And I hit I go to Twitter, I go to all of the websites that I go to, and this is not a good way to begin the day. Not only because of the negativity, but you're just immediately like at the lowest level. And so he's saying, don't do that. Center your thoughts and bring them to the highest level. So I just love the practical value of it. But remember that also, I want you to read this in connection to like see it in some part as a continuation of the ideas that are in chapter 1. So remember in chapter 1, he makes a big deal out of the difference between the letters and the words, and that the letters, he says, are analogous to like the physical object, the spoken word or the word itself is analogous to physical objects in the universe, the world of physical creation. Whereas the letters, he says, are the souls of the word. Remember, because they compose the word, and the thought that's behind the letters and the word is like the essence of godliness itself. So you have to remember that Amud HaTefillah, while it does not represent the fully articulated, ordered argument, so to speak, of a single thinker, of the Baal Shem Tov, rather, it's a composite of different teachings. It was put together carefully to kind of build philosophically. So you can't ignore chapter 1 as we head into chapter 2. So that's one thing I wanted to say. But let me float kind of a strange question for you, and maybe we'll kind of let it hover over the first part of chapter 2 as we talk about it. So one of the ideas that he introduces in chapter 1, and this is really, I think, one of the most interesting and important ideas in the first chapter, is this idea that the words of on the prayer book, like you can, because a word is akin to a physical object, right, or analogous to, it's both, I guess a word is both an actual manifestation of like the lower level of the physical world, but it's also analogous to any object in the world. And therefore, when you're praying the words, he says in chapter 1, like you want to get to a place where the words kind of dissolve and you get beyond the literal meaning of the words to the kind of spirit that's behind it. You remember that part of chapter 1? So one might think from that, I'm having trouble articulating this. You might think, well, the words aren't that important. Like, why does it matter? What if you wake up and, you know, if I get up and I start talking politics with somebody, like, words are only the outer manifestation. Why does it matter? Why do I have to be so exacting in what's permitted and not permitted? If I'm living in this world where the Baal Shem Tov seems to suggest you can just kind of get beyond the surface level of things anyway, none of it is like really real. Do you see what I'm asking?
The question is this: could this be a reflection of vibration, and vibration communicating? You know, every plant, every animal has a different level of vibration. Could these words be enunciated in a separate, in a sound process that then connects spiritually upward and takes and flows from your lips to your mind upward? So you know, and then the question, of course, becomes: is that vibration different for Ashkenazi and Sephardim? So I mean, that's because the prayer patterns are so completely different. So as far as sounds, so the question is how do these sounds and how do these words and how do these letters and together lift themselves upward into connection with God?
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, I don't know. That's what I'm hearing. That's sort of what I'm hearing a little bit from you, because it's about the connection.
Right. Well, so let me hold that out there, because I don't know that I have a great answer. And it may be that I don't fully understand you. So help me understand, how does that connect to this question about why the Baal Shem Tov is so concerned with the particular words we use? Because
he knows that certain vibrations communicate at a higher and different level.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Because he's designed for himself a pattern. There's lots of people have opinions here. So
okay, yeah.
I laid the groundwork here.
Okay, Lenny, go ahead.
I have a much more mundane explanation for that.
Okay.
You know, everybody who speaks propaganda also has to listen to their own propaganda, and at times, and they always become convinced of their own propaganda. So the words that you say, while it has an effect on everybody, are words that go directly from your mouth into your ear and into your brain and creates a feedback loop. So you got to be really careful what your speech is.
Right.
You don't want to brainwash yourself.
Yeah, that's really powerful. No, I mean, I think that's exactly right. That's a very, very important point about language, that it's not just a method of communication outwards. It actually shapes how we think, right? That's one of the things that we've learned about language now. You know, and Judaism has said that's true for a long time. Cheryl and then Anne. And by the way, I don't know that I'm seeing everyone's hands. I just see a few. I don't see everyone in front of me. So, but go ahead, Cheryl and then Anne.
My question would be, how would you get to this higher state without words?
Okay. Without
going through this process that the Best or his followers are laying out?
Great question. So, and I just want to take the opportunity. So I don't want to kind of railroad what Cliff said, but I'm just trying to tease out multiple ideas. And I want to state what I said earlier in light of what Cheryl just said. I want to just state this more simply. So the tension that I'm suggesting we might see is, it seems to me that on one of the things he's saying, and I'm going to just at the risk of really distorting the magnificence and the complexity of these ideas from chapter 1, is ultimately it's not about the words. It's about what's underneath the words, right? And yet it seems like in chapter 2, he's saying the words themselves actually really do matter. The words you say really matter. And I'm asking, how do we resolve that? Okay, Anne Prawl.
Yeah, I had the same question, because it seemed like he was saying that not only does every word embody the whole world, but every word has within it the essence of everything in the world. Every letter of that word has the essence of the whole world. And so as I was reading it, I was thinking, well, if every letter of every word can get you to the same place, then maybe, swearing at your dog first thing in the morning is just as holy as praying, because
Right.
it has all the letters in it.
Right. Great. I like that a lot. Do you really wake up and swear at your dog?
Only when I trip over her.
Okay. All right. Well, no, that's exactly there. You've articulated the problem, right? Like if the whole world is contained in like a raindrop, why does anything, why do the specific things matter? Right. So Cliff, I'm still having trouble kind of tying this into what you had said, and I don't want to like do violence to the idea that you put out there by trampling it, but I'm just having trouble connecting it. Lenny had his hand up.
I just want to comment real quickly that if these things didn't matter, if the concrete manifestation of your speech didn't matter, why is there even a created universe? Right?
Great.
If everything was just the
Right.
spirituality behind it, then we could go live in the next world.
Right. So right, and I think that on the one hand, this question that I've introduced sounds like this, like kind of the question that theologians would love, like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. But I actually do think it is very important in particular thinking about a particularly Jewish expression of the idea of God's unity. So just to take this a step further, and I think about this a lot as a prayer leader, as somebody who leads fairly traditional prayer service at least 4 days a week. I think about this because one of the things that happens in traditional prayer, as some of you are very aware because you've shared with me your annoyance or frustration or sadness about this, is that the prayer moves very quickly. And there's a tendency, a natural tendency to mumble some of the words or to blur some of the words, right? And we're told, however, that in particular with two parts of the service in particular, that we have to pronounce them correctly. And that is to say, in particular, so the Gemara says that if you recite the Shema and the V'ahavta and the paragraphs of the Shema, and you don't have kavanah, and one of the understandings of the word kavanah, at a minimum, it means pronouncing each word correctly. If you don't do it that way, then what you've done may have spiritual value, but it does not have halachic value. You have not fulfilled your obligation, the halachic obligation to recite the Shema, if you have not pronounced the words correctly. And in addition, for the Amidah, where the kavanah is not halachically required in the same way, nonetheless, all of our rabbis, we have to pray it with kavanah, like we're supposed to, even though it's not necessarily halachically required in the same way as for the Shema. So where the rubber hits the road, I'm hoping in a long way to circle back to Lenny's point. Brad, I see your hand in a second. I'll get you. And I'm just sort of playing with this this identity that the Baal Shem Tov has introduced between the spoken word and the physical world, right? Because that was kind of the premise of chapter 1, or parts of chapter 1. Our answer to why does it matter if I say the words with precision is kind of the same answer we would get to Lenny's question, which is why does it matter if I take what's in the physical world seriously at all? I mean, Lenny, you didn't word it like that, but another way of saying it is this: it matters how, even though I recognize when I go out there in the world that everything is one, and like behind, each of your faces is just, somewhat arbitrary genetic expression of what's really this large or single unity in the entire world. And so given that really what matters is the larger unity in the whole span of the cosmos, we might say any particular thing in it doesn't matter that much, right? Like when I see a cockroach, I could just kind of smash it. It doesn't matter. And when I see a person, I don't really have to be that concerned with how I treat any single person, because really what matters is the larger picture. But in fact, every letter and every word matters. Every word in the prayer matters, because that's the tradition as it's come down to us. In the same way, when we encounter the physical world as it's given, even though it is not the final expression of divine unity, like this tree that I'm looking at out of my window, its particular shape in this moment, the way that the wind is moving in, the person who I see walking down the street, that person matters, because that person is the expression of the divine at this moment. And therefore we honor the words. Each word has to be said specifically. And I believe one of the lessons that we're teaching ourselves is that how we move through the world and honor the physical expression of God's world in this moment really matters. And that nothing is to be taken for granted, nothing is to be overlooked. How we act in each moment, in relationship with each person, whether we say a blessing over a glass of water or whether we just drink it down, Judaism holds that those specific acts very much matter, because there is a unity between this specific parts of this world of multiplicity. Well, let me say it like this: the specific expressions of this world of multiplicity, you, me, all of the specifics around us, are expressions of the divine. They are an extension of the divine unity. It's not a separate realm. So we can't ignore, and this becomes really important, because this is a major philosophical difference between Judaism and other traditions. The state of the physical world matters a lot, and the more we honor each piece of it, the better, because it is an expression of God's unity. We don't ignore the physical world, saying that, well, really what matters is what's beyond it, right? That would be antithetical to Judaism. So the details matter, even though we recognize that the details are not in and of themselves the divine. Does that make sense? Okay, Brad.
Yeah, well, I'm going to ruin everything now, because
Hey.
no, but we're at the same time in all of this, we are tied and can't get away from, in our mortal existence, indigestion and arthritis,
right,
and all of the things that distract from that. When we look outside and appreciate, as you gave that great example, at the same time we have a toothache,
right,
and it really that.
Yeah.
And then also I thought a little bit before that when you're in shul during services, how do you avoid thinking about how maybe you shouldn't have been swearing at the dog
right,
in the morning, and
right,
those kind of random thoughts that it takes so much discipline to get away
right.
from.
Well,
And the discipline, in fact, then gets in a way as well.
That's right, because then
So-
that becomes a whole series of
Yes.
thoughts. Well,
Yeah.
let me just say the answer to your second question is actually easier, only because that's what he's talking about in much of chapter 2, which we have not really yet gotten into. We will get there. The first question is beautiful. That's exactly right. It's beautiful. That part, there's part of the world, part of our experience that is negative, and it just seems to distract us from holiness. And I'm straying a little bit from from what we've read so far, but one of the principles of the Kabbalah that underlies all Hasidic teaching as well, is that that even within the pain, even within the darkness, even within the suffering, and obviously a toothache is a somewhat frivolous example, but we could go much more intense. All of us here have experienced some grievous loss in our lives. That those two are included within the divine. right? There's nothing, and this circles back to this main point. There's nothing in the world that is not part of the divine. And therefore, how we relate to each piece and making sure that we say the proper blessing and that we don't overlook everything matters because it's part of the divine. But that also means, troublingly and difficultly, that even when there seems to be an absence of the divine, that even that is part of, even that is included in the oneness. So, we don't have time to really treat that point in the way it needs to be treated here. I've talked about that in a class I taught in the spring, but I just wanted to affirm what your point is. It's actually very, very important. Sarah.
I just want to acknowledge that when there is indigestion or arthritis pain, those things intrude on us. Those aren't things that come from us, nor that we permit. They intrude on us. And how you deal with them, I suppose, depends upon how significant the problem is. And you do a quick review. It doesn't mean, and I don't think Brad is saying it, I don't think that then speaks to the effort we make on other times, absent those pains, when thoughts intrude that don't need to. You don't need to be thinking of your shopping list when you're supposed to be praying. And
right.
So certain things present themselves to us that we can push away, and other things we cannot.
Right.
And that's just how life is. But if anything, I would say that the teachings here understand real life very well.
Yeah, that's right. That's very well said. And the other thing that I would say is one of the things that we're supposed to do in Hasidism's view of suffering or of negativity is that the task is to elevate it, right? To find, and what that means is to find some way that we can see it too as part of the larger expression of the divine. Somehow, whether we can see goodness in it, and in some cases, I think that's impossible, right? If depending what we're talking about. But to take a toothache example, that's not hard to find goodness in a toothache, because it's, thank God, I have nerve endings in my body that remind me that I have to take care of this body. Why do I need my body to not hurt? Why must I go to the dentist now that my body's telling me to? Because with a whole body, I can better serve Hashem, right? That would be, just off the top of my head, an example of how to elevate the suffering of a toothache. But there is a kind of suffering in the world where I don't think you just look at it and you say, oh, it's for the best, right? I mean, there's real darkness in the world that all of us have faced in varying degrees. But the challenge of Kabbalah and of Hasidism is to, in some way, to fold that into the service of God. And that's when if you've seen this phrase, I've forgotten how he translates it. I think he translates it in the classical sense, sweetening the judgments. Do you remember seeing this phrase? Anybody seen that? Hamtakin ha-dinim, sweetening the judgments. That is the word judgment, you shouldn't take it literally. I don't think that's a useful way to take it. Rather, if you think of the judgments as an expression of the divine capacity for deen, of God's self-concealment, so that there appears to be in the world dimensions where God is not present, and we experience those as suffering. The sweetening of the judgments is finding ways to even elevate those experiences of suffering into the part of the larger unity. So I wanted just to say that. Okay, I'm going to move us on, which is kind of ridiculous because we could, spend our lives speaking about just that one concept, but we have to move on. Or I want us to move on so we can get to other ideas. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Let's look at number 17. Will somebody read 17 out loud? I love this one. And I will try to, why don't you do that, and then I'll include my translation after that. Anybody want to read? It's on page 19, teaching number 17.
In all that one sees or experiences, one should be remembering the blessed divine presence. In love or attraction, remember divine love. In fear, remember divine awesomeness of the blessed name, as indicated in many places. Even when one performs bodily evacuations, one should consider this as a process of discarding the bad from the good. The remaining is good and is used in his blessed service. This is the meaning of Yehudim.
Okay, so first of all, what is he mean by Yehudim? We'll start with that. Whoops, did I do that right? What screen are you looking at right now? Are you looking at my translation right now?
No,
Oh, whoops. Okay. I don't know what I'm doing. One sec. Where are we? Oh, there it is. Okay, so first of all, what are Yehudim? Yehudim means unifications, and this is a very important concept in the Kabbalah, where through your own mental efforts and your capacity to have the right kavanot, the right intentions, and a deep understanding, you are perceiving unity and manifesting unity in God's world. Those are Yehudim. What I love about this teaching is that there's something so practical and profound about it. But what I think is so important about it is in a way it's such a perfect encapsulation of what the Baal Shem Tov brought to the world. Because especially with the bathroom example, the Baal Shem Tov is trying to give people an understanding of the teachings of the Kabbalah and of God's unity in the most basic aspects of the fabric of their lives. And so when you have the experience of love, let's say after Anne has tripped over and sworn at her dog, and then she comes back to the dog and she realizes how sweet the dog is, and she's petting it, and we all have that incredible there's something very. I just saw, my wife and I just watched my octopus teacher. I don't know if anybody's seen that interesting interesting documentary about a fellow who follows a single octopus for a year. He keeps going back to the same spot, and he learns a lot about the octopus, and he develops like a real affection for it. And that feeling of especially love between a person and a pet is so incredible, because you're transcending the species in a way. But you shouldn't just enjoy that and just say, oh, it feels so good to love my little dog or my octopus, but rather, but you should try to, that should summon up in you like the deepest love that there could be, which is a love of a being for their creator. And likewise with every other emotion.
The octopus isn't kosher.
Right. He didn't eat the octopus. Neither are dogs, by the way. I mean, right. He didn't eat the octopus.
It's easier to make that connection when you're having a positive feeling, and you can
right.
say, oh, this is just like love. But it's hard. I mean, if you're really talking about being afraid,
mm-hmm.
taking that moment and thinking about fear of God, sometimes being afraid is where you need to be at that moment. And if you stop to think about God, you would die.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, though that's interesting, because what you said, this is interesting, because I think there's a beautiful thread here of connection between this and the previous conversation. I don't think it's about negating your feelings. I don't think you're saying, oh, the love for the dog is an illusion, and really everything is about the love of God. I don't think it's about that. And it's not about negating the experience in the world. It's about using the experience in the world to elevate us, to kind of make us look upward, and to remember that it connects to that same emotion. The emotion of, and I guess this is another part of what's important, for what I think is important and also very challenging for me about this teaching, is that the Besh is trying to make it real. Like, I think one of the things that's coming across in this teaching is when we talk about the love for God, don't like try to say like, gee, what would it be like for an angel to feel love? Like in the real celestial realms, what is it really like to love God? I think the best is saying, like, draw on what you know, like that feeling of affection and connection. Like that's what you're trying to summon up in your service of God. So, that's why I think this is valuable. But Sarah, I'll get you in 1 second. But to answer your other point, it is easier with nice, warm, fuzzy feelings. But what about feelings of fear? I will tell you this. In my experience as a rabbi, there have been moments when I've certainly not been terrified. I'm not talking about like pachad, when I'm trembling. I mean, I've had those experiences in my life, but not from being a rabbi. But I've had moments where I had to summon my courage for this thing or that thing. And I'd say, okay, well, you're really worried about the outcome of doing X, but imagine now that you're standing, at the end of your life and you're giving an accounting before Kadosh Baruch Hu of your choices. You would then be really afraid that you didn't do this thing you have to do. So I think that's an example of what the Baal Shem Tov means with those more difficult emotions, is trying to find some way to connect it. Sarah.
I'm thinking that maybe, I see where it says unifications for Yehudim, but I'm thinking it also means in a more contemporary sense that interconnectiveness that we're always talking about. The line here says making a Yehud means not only recognizing how all things are interconnected, but specifically including oneself within that web of manifest experience. And this morning, before the class, I actually came across a review and a recommendation from my octopus teacher. And the point that the review made is that this guy does daily dives and actually enters into the water wanting to see his friend, recognizing other creatures, other marine mammals, but it is including himself in that underwater existence. And that's interconnected.
Right, that's nice. What that note that you were just reading, where was that?
That came from Pillar of Prayer, and that came from before the first chapter. So what is it?
Oh, right, in the introduction.
22,
Okay.
Roman numeral 22.
Nice, that's perfect. Yeah, okay, that's great. That's great. Yeah, so because I made it sound like this abstract, theological concept, which it is, but it also just means like being able to see connections between different parts of the world. So thank you. Okay. I'm going to move on if we can. By the way, I hope that, it seems like a funny thing to say because you might think this is natural, but I think we have to make an extra effort. Remember that we're not just reading about the Baal Shem Tov. We're trying to figure out how to integrate these teachings into our lives. So he, in number 17, he gives you practical advice for making Yehudim, for making connections, and for thinking about your ordinary experience in divine terms. So try to think about what it would look like to integrate that into your own life. Okay. There's so much good stuff at the end of this chapter that I think I'm gonna skip us forward a little bit if I can. And then if I skip something that people wanted to talk about or had questions about, let's make time for that. Okay. One moment here. Okay, so let's look at number 20. We're on page 21 of the book. So one of the reasons that this is another, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that's practical in terms of the world of prayer, and so that's one of the reasons this chapter is really powerful. So this is another example of that. So in this teaching, we know this, but it's so hard to do. And in part it's hard to do because prayer gets so formulaic, at least in Jewish prayer, certainly gets so formulaic. But he's saying, don't just run in and pray. Like one of the implicit lessons of the Baal Shem Tov is that prayer is a real thing. Prayer is a profoundly spiritual exercise. Prayer has the capacity to unite you with your creator. It is a form of meditation. We'll just use that word because that word is, in our contemporary parlance, that word maybe resonates with people. Prayer is a form of meditation. And so you wouldn't dream of like walking into a meditation sitting, with like 30,000 things on your mind and a cup of coffee in your hand. And, you're going through your to-do list and you're just like, all right, I'm meditating, but man, I really got to go to the bank later. But I think Jews do that in prayer all the time, because in a way, either we don't take prayer seriously enough or we misunderstand prayer as primarily this like social communal gathering. And it is that, but that's not mainly what it is. Mainly it's a bridge between a being and the being's creator. So anyway, he says, and that one has to strengthen or fortify oneself is how they translate it. Strengthen oneself so that you have the presence of mind to pray. And but what's interesting is that he wants you to know yourself. The Best wants you to know what you need. And I would extend this to you as an invitation in your prayer at Shari Torah, whether it's on Shabbos or whether it's in the weekday prayer. And the Best would not agree with what I'm about to say, because what I'm saying kind of goes beyond the halakha, and his teaching is built around the halakha in ways that I won't bother with right now. But he, on the one hand, he says, strengthen yourself for prayer. But then he says, don't overdo it. Don't exhaust yourself, right? If you spend all of your mental energy preparing for prayer, you're not going to have mental energy for the prayer itself, which is a funny idea. But what I take from that is that the Best wants you just to really think about what you're trying to accomplish in tefillah. And if you did nothing else, if you took nothing else from a mood to tefillah except this idea that before you sit down to pray, you should think about what you're trying to accomplish in tefillah and what is possible in tefillah, and made a few minutes before you sat down and turned on the Zoom camera, or, God willing, one day before you come to shul, and really just prepared yourself for that and understood that the tefillah contains those capacities, and to clear your mind and to summon your strength and to say, okay, I'm building a muscle here. I'm working on my attention. I'm working on my focus. I'm working, to refer to something Brad said earlier, on not becoming distracted with thoughts that are external to prayer, and not becoming distracted with the thought that I don't want to become distracted. If you just realize you're flexing all those muscles and then sit down for prayer, that alone would justify your having read this entire book. Okay. Now, let's pause here to get real. Let me ask you, who here experiences Jewish prayer as a form of meditation, as you currently do it? Okay, Cheryl. Cheryl, did you always do that?
I think because I came to Jewish learning as an adult, the situation in which I started learning about prayer was one where that made that more obvious to me. So, once I started that kind of learning, it was like, yeah, prayer is meditation.
Right. Okay, I see. Right. Because you had been around. Okay.
Yeah.
Others?
Well, I skipped over the part, where it's just like what your parents tell you to do or something, because my parents never told me to do it.
Right. And, I think it's interesting, because when your parents tell you how to do it, I mean, Jewish prayer, it's so hard to be a Jew. It's so hard to be a Jew, because, I don't know, and maybe I'm sure a Buddhist would be delighted to disagree with me about this. But, I imagine, like, if you grow up in a family where just like Zen meditation is the thing, like you sit down for Zen meditation, and I don't know, it seems like natural that you're going to get something profound out of it, because there's nothing else going on. You're sitting, and so
I would
you know.
disagree with that completely, but I don't want to.
Okay, all right, but just bear with me, and then let's come back to it. I'm not. To be really clear, Lenny, I'm not, as a person who has practiced meditation, I'm not saying it's simple. I'm just saying you sit down, and it seems like implicit and clear in the task of sitting down that you're supposed to kind of be reaching beyond the world of experience. The problem with, and I'm willing to be proven wrong in that, but I'm just saying, in contrast to that, with Jewish prayer, you sit down, you got a book, you got people who are around you. Even in the world of Zoom, you're looking at everyone, you're hearing other people. You have songs to sing, you've got a new language to learn, and so you can get into this thing where those parts of the prayer, all of which are externals, you think, all right, that's what I'm doing. I'm learning to say the words, and I'm learning to be with everybody, and I'm learning the melodies. That's what this is about. But that's not what it's about, right? And that's why I'm saying that it's difficult in a different way. I was not saying Zen meditation is simple, far from it.
I'll just say this: the barrier to entry of Jewish prayer is a lot higher than sitting down and doing Zen meditation.
Okay.
But theoretically, the first part of achieving anything in meditation is giving up your expectations and you're striving to achieve.
Right.
So.
Right. That's the nut at the heart of especially Zen meditation. That's forever difficult to
I shouldn't be
get
talking. This is
no. I think it's valuable. It's important. And in addition to that, it also connects, by the way, with something Brad said earlier, which is how do you not, even if you get past all of that other stuff, and I see you, I'll get you in 1 second. Even if you get past all the other stuff, that, focusing on the language and the people and the song and everything, and then you get to the part where you are you begin to free yourself from distracting thoughts. How do you not make the concern with not having distracting thoughts not in itself a distracting thought, which is, I think, a Jewish analogy to what you were just mentioning. Anyway, Anne, Sarah, other hands? Yes.
I think I laugh when you said that it's so hard to be Jewish, because I think at the core of this problem of being Jewish is the quest for authenticity that we have to have as Jews. Is like, am I being the right kind of Jew? Am I praying it in the right way? Am I doing it the most natively right way? And I think that's what was so attractive, and it still is so attractive to people who discovered Jewish renewal, that there's this pathway to like authentic Jewish certified ways to have a personal connection with the divine that don't require but to do what the Baal Shem Tov is talking about, and to be able to, I mean, he didn't use the word meditate, but you did, to be able to use your Jewish prayer as meditation. Your Jewish practice has to be so good. Yeah. You're not trying to remember the Hebrew words and what is that? Am I pronouncing it right? And if your Jewishness is that good, then you can let go and make it meditation. But I've been to prayer services with Rabbi Aryeh where we spent 20 minutes chanting one phrase from one prayer, and that is prayer, and that is uplifting and moving. But then a friend who was there who's from an Orthodox background said, well, now I have to go home and pray because we didn't get all the words.
Right.
And like everybody's got their idea of what is authentic.
Well, I'm glad you said that. And by the way, it's not a coincidence that Jewish renewal is an outgrowth of Hasidism, right? There would be, right? I know you know that. I'm just saying that for everybody else. Like, Reb Zalman, Zichrono Livracha, clearly, I mean, the guy came out of Chabad, and then he's drawing on a whole range of Hasidic teachings, and that was very, very, very. I mean, it's just central to what renewal was doing, precisely for the reasons you're saying. I know you know that. I'm just sharing that with others who might not be aware. Yeah, that's right. But and this really is a deep challenge for uh, contemporary authentic Jewish spirituality, because I said to you all the other day, I think maybe it was last time when we met in this class, that one of the best things you can do is to learn the prayers so well that you memorize them. And I know that's not easy, and I know it's counterintuitive because we want everything to be meaningful, and we think that memorization is a sign of like a dull mind. But I'm telling you that that's nonsense. That, God willing, eventually you can get beyond memorization and understand the words. But it is one of the tools that will allow you to embrace what is yours, right? You are a Jew. The prayers in the Siddur are your prayers. And I'm sorry to say this because it's not popular and some of you might not like it, but because you happened to have the blessing of being born a Jew, I want to say that prayer book is your responsibility. Doesn't mean you got to learn the whole thing, but to just to say, well, I'm just going to focus on the letter Aleph and I'm going to meditate. I don't know. I feel that Jews, part of our obligation is to learn what we can learn. Now, again, Ivan, I see you. I'll get you in 1 second. I do think that we should build our Jewish competency so that the gap between traditional Jewish prayer and powerful, enlightening, transcendent experiences closes. But the other thing I want to say to everybody is that thank God, literally, that while prayer is, kind of the pinnacle of the Jewish tradition's idea of spiritual experience, it is not the only way to access God, right? And that we've talked about in other classes, hitbo dedut, the practice of like walking meditation and chant, and like there are many other things that one can do. So I really don't want to be heard to be saying, if you don't memorize the prayer and develop fluency, you'll never talk with God, right? That would not be a good thing to say. It would not be a Jewish thing to say. So, and also, and then I'll go to Ivan right after this. Also, it should be said that all of those other spiritual practices, whether it's chanting or other forms of Jewish meditation, those eventually get folded into your prayer practice inevitably, right? And that's a good thing. But of course, the best here is just he's talking about the traditional tefillah. Ivan.
My question is, are you suggesting that you should memorize the prayers without understanding what the words are, or just so that you can say them without the meaning? Or are you saying memorize the prayers in Hebrew with their translation so you know what you're saying? I'm not understanding what you're getting at.
Yeah, well, so I'm
betray my Mitnagdim ancestors.
Right. The McNogdim are just going crazy right now. But look, for sure, I think that ultimately where one wants to be, and we're definitely off track here, but it's important. Ideally where one would want to be is fluency in Hebrew, so that one can kind of effortlessly pray these words and understand them. And then if you understand them, you can shift in and out of the rational. Because in the first chapter of this book, Ivan, which you haven't been able to join us yet, he talks about kind of getting beyond the literal meaning of the words. But for sure, literacy and fluency are the goal. But I do believe and do stand by the idea that for people who are trying to develop a relationship to traditional Jewish prayer who don't know Hebrew, I really believe that there is a lot of value in learning how to say the words of the prayer, and so that it's like from muscle memory. I would say to everybody, don't stop there for sure. But I'm saying if you can get to that point, it opens up the gates of what's possible to do in prayer. Because when I'm praying the Amidah or the Shema or whatever it might be, I'm able to say those words and to connect to the tradition, but also I can turn off my brain and I'm able to sort of transcend, attempt to transcend and try to do kind of a form of Jewish meditation through the words. And yes, the mitnagdim that are in your family and in my own would hate that I just said, turn off your
Because I
brain.
find it very interesting that the more I learned the meaning of the words, the more I became fluent in Hebrew, that is in prayer Hebrew, the less meaningful were the prayers.
Right.
Because the more they were grounded in, why are we saying these same formula day after day after day, 3 times a day? I mean, what's the meaning of this?
That's right.
Whereas when you could get lost in the nigunim, if you will, of recitation, with the exception maybe of the times when response is really critical, like the Kaddish, it was easier to separate yourself and in a sense go to a kind of, because the rabbi said you can only think of one thing at a time. And if you're thinking about the meaning of the words, you're going to be taken away from the thought of the prayer.
Right, that's right. And that is
the very first thing that is said in this lesson, don't talk. Talk concretizes your thoughts.
That's right. And and I think that turns out to be a really central concern and I shouldn't say a concern, a kind of foundational theological idea of the Baal Shem Tov is that the specificity matters, but every word and every particle in the universe is a microcosm of the whole. And that you want to, on the one hand, be able to honor the specifics of the pieces of the world of multiplicity because they matter, but also you want to be able to see the whole universe in a grain of sand. And that's a very important principle in the ideas of the Baal Shem Tov. Okay, Brad, go ahead, and then we're going to move on.
Okay, I think it might be just for me a good time to mention, or that I think of, really the most beautiful, wonderful thing that Judaism has shown me thus far is that Hashem cares more that we struggle with these things than that we actually accomplish them.
Wait, sorry, say that one more time.
The important thing is that we're attempting to do this. It's not that we get to the top of the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it might be even more blessed that we know that we'll never get to the top of the mountain, but still we struggle.
It's so interesting,
and that's what God appreciates.
Yeah. Well, what I want to say is that I think that the Baal Shem Tov, really what he was committed to was the idea that and here's where I think he might actually push back against what I've been saying for the last few minutes, because one of the things that he really, I guess one of the main ideas that made him the transformational figure that he was, and like the kind of world historical figure that he was in Jewish life, was that he really did think that everybody can get to the top of the mountain. And so he would really want me to be very, very clear. He would want us to be very, very clear that this notion that there needs to be a certain level of competency and fluency in order to communicate with God, he really would want to break that down, right? So I want to be really clear that we're talking about two things. We're talking about, on the one hand, the idea that Jews in 21st century America have a real struggle connecting to the specifics of their tradition, and our shared goal, I think, that we want to increase fluency with that. That's one thing. The other thing is the capacity and the obligation and the blessing for every person to be able to cleave to the Creator and to perceive the unity of God in all things and in themselves. He really did believe, Brad, that every single person had that ability. And that, that's how is in his taking Kabbalah out of the yeshivas and out of these, hushed tones of being studied only by the elites, and he's trying to make it accessible to everybody. So it's not that he thought it was easy, right? He understood it was difficult, but it was difficult not because it required a level of linguistic or mental sophistication, but it was difficult. It was challenging because it's just because of our humanity. It's universally challenging. So I wanted to put that out there.
I didn't think I didn't think that that part of it, the actual achievement or getting to the pinnacle, was the most important part.
I hear you.
That I said it was that the struggle, that we struggle to do this.
Yeah. Yep. I hear you.
Means yeah. Okay. Anyway.
Yep.
You kind of just brought out the Buddhist in me in this conversation today. Maybe we could change the semantics from, engage in the struggle and being involved in a process. And instead of looking at achievement, dedicating ourselves to the process. And exactly what you said, Rabbi, about Jews are having problems connecting to their Jewishness is pretty simple. It's that they want to go to a concert on Friday night and there's an interference there. It's almost simpler than a problem. They're conflicted about what they want to do.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Lenny, for saying that. No, I actually do. I do like that reframing of it. Sarah.
Yeah, thanks. Cheryl, when you mentioned growing up, what your experiences were, that reminded me of something I've talked at length with someone else in a Jewish situation, which was that we spend a lot of our childhood, and in my case, some of my adulthood, in learning how to be a Jew and not why to be a Jew.
Right.
And I think that for me, thinking about why I'm doing something has a lot more significance than merely how to. I'm okay with learning to memorize the prayer. And I've done very, very well. I'm very comfortable. But for me, the significance is where is this taking me?
Right.
I'm ready to go. Why is this significant?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I think, I do think and this is really a tangent, but this is actually very, very important. I think about this a lot. I think that one of the challenges of Jewish institutional life and synagogue life in particular has been out of our anxiety that we're losing the past, out of our anxiety that we're losing Jewish tradition and Jewish teachings. We've often emphasized competency, fluency, holding on to the tradition, or getting caught up in these obtuse discussions about when it's okay to change the tradition, when it's not, rather than how do we connect people with ultimate meaning and connecting to their creator. And that's a major challenge. That's why it's, I have not talked publicly very much about my own decision to shift in what I'm doing, and down the road I will talk more about that. But I'll just say it's a lot easier to be a teacher than to be a rabbi, the way a rabbi is currently understood in 21st century American life. Cheryl, did you have a hand up?
Yeah, just going back to the beginning of this discussion, I think we really limit ourselves when we kind of make this opposition between sort of like the linguistic competency or knowing Hakka and meditation or finding joy in repeating a single phrase over and over again.
Yeah.
Part of my path to practicing Judaism was, the first thing that got me was the music.
Right.
Back then it was like Kavra Shalom, and we were singing Reb Aryeh's melodies and Shlomo Carlebach's melodies. And I think of it as like, this is God's bait. This is the thing that, that grabbed me.
Right.
I wanted to hear that music. And it was as good as going to some other concert Friday night. And being grabbed into that, I'm a person who likes language and words anyway, but it was like extra motivation to learn all about the prayers and, learn the history and, learn the secret meanings.
Right.
So
Yeah, I
it's
like
one
that.
or the other.
I like that. God's bait. Yes, that's right. Yep, that's right. Okay, I'm going to shift us now. We're going to jump forward to where are we going to jump? I want to go to number 31, which is on page 26. I'll give you just a moment to just glance at that to remind yourself. We'll talk about it. So, so first of all, this idea of one second, someone's trying to get in here. The idea of katnut, which is translated here as restricted consciousness. Katnut literally means like smallness, from the katan, the word katan, which means small. Katnut is so restricted consciousness. He simply, he simply means like you're focused on yourself or distracting thoughts, right? You're not thinking about your mind is far from unity and from connecting to the source, right? And I love this idea that and I think it fits right in with kind of what we're talking about, and that is that so then just focus on the words, don't try to think like, okay, wait, what did the Baal Shem Tov say about God's unity and everything is connected and what is that? Just look at the words and just try to pray with kavanah in the simplest sense. Just use the printed words. It sounds simple, but I think for me, Brad, I want to circle back to something you said, Brad, earlier. Brad, one of the forms of katnut. One of the forms of katnut, restricted consciousness, is that I'm thinking about this thing and that thing, and I'm hungry and I want a coffee or whatever it is. That is a form of katnut. But another form of katnut is like obsessing about the fact that you're trying to not be caught up in katnut, right? So every time you're praying, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to get distracted. I'm going to get distracted. I'm going to get distracted. That's also a form of katnut, right? It's just wearing a different garment.
No matter how hard we try, we're tied to our physical self.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And
I
think what he's saying, what I hear in this teaching is not only no matter how I would rephrase it, not just no matter how hard we try, but sometimes the harder we try, the more messed up we get. And that's why I think this idea of being like a 1-year-old baby, I don't know if they translate it like that in here.
Simple child.
Yeah, simple child, right. It's literally a 1-year-old. I do think that there's something about that. He's like, you want to also be able to just sort of turn off your obsessive thoughts and just say like, okay, all I have to do right now is just sit here and enjoy the words, or just read simply, right? There's no single strategy for breaking through. I think, and I think so. He's offering this idea that there is something about simplicity that is sometimes the thing that will get your head back in to what you're doing. There is this beautiful Kabbalistic little teaching here, allusion here at the end, but we don't have time to go into it. But he has an awesome little wordplay and acronym based on the word katav, which means written, but we're not going to go there. Okay. Okay, let me just, let's see here. I've got to find one final note I wanted to focus on before we close this chapter and then talk about next time. Okay, here we go. Yeah, let's go to number 33, which is on page 27. Now here, whoops, let me share my translation. Here I'm afraid that Menachem Kalas, who's a brilliant person and a great translator, I feel like he's taking some liberties here, but maybe I'm wrong. Oops. He's taking some liberties with the translation. So let's see if we can get through that. So he says, so again, we're on 27, number 33. He says, connect your bodily awareness to the word. I don't even know what that means, but in any event, really, my translation is pretty literal, but I think a little more honest to the text. So he says that you want to cleave to the body of the word is really what he says, and I think what he means by that, the reason this is a meaningful distinction, and then after we get to the pshat, let's talk about why this matters and what it means. I think it goes back to what we read about in chapter 1. The word itself is like a body. There's just the word. And what he's talking about in this teaching, he's talking about how you go from one level to the next level. And Lenny, having heard what you said about having it be part of the I think you said process and not struggle. I don't know if this conflicts with that or how to exactly fit the language in, but he does use the language of levels a lot, which I guess that does fit in with process as well. But in any event, he's talking about like when you're trying, you've started your tefillah at a high level, and then you got distracted, like a thought that thought came into your mind about somebody who's always doing this or that in the prayer service just annoyed you, whatever it might be, and you had a distracted thought, and so you've descended from your level into tefillah. So then you try to summon your kavanah, right? You're trying to get back and let go of that distracting thought. You're trying to connect to the essence of what this is all about, trying to connect to God's unity and God's presence, and to kind of dissolve yourself into the prayer. And it takes a lot of effort. And the way you do this, he says, cleave to the body of the word. Okay, and again, Menachem Kalas has translated as connect your bodily awareness to the word. And he's smart enough and well read enough that I'm not willing to say that he's got the translation wrong. He's basing it on something that I probably don't have in front of me, but what it literally says is cleave to the body of the word. And what I think he means by this is, for example, in the Yotzer prayer, God is referred to as Yotzer Or, literally God who fashions light. Now, the Baal Shem Tov didn't think, and I don't think, that really what that prayer is ultimately about is God making the lights of the sky. I think it's about a different thing. But he's saying, cleave to the body of the word. It says God fashions light. Focus on that. Try to connect to the beauty of that idea of God as fashioning light. God made the sun, or God makes light move in beautiful ways through windows, and we see like the shadows or whatever. And then he says, put neshama into the word, right? And this, he's wants us to remember these earlier teachings, that the word is the word, but the word has behind it a neshama, right? A deeper unity with other things. So we're back at this level where I think what we're talking about is, you've got distracting thoughts. You get rid of the distracting thoughts by focusing on the literal, the body of the word. And then you're trying to put the neshama into it. You're trying to connect it to God, who is the source of all things, right? Even if that's just the idea, even if it's not something that's said in the prayer, it's just something that God is the source of all things. You're trying to put that understanding into the words as you pray them, okay? Then he does actually talk about your body. you have to arouse yourself initially with your body, or arouse, you could also translate that as stir yourself up. So the word is hitorer, which I'm belaboring because in Lecha Dodi, this word, actually comes from, I think, Isaiah. Hitoreri, hitori, right? You know that passage from Lecha Dodi? It means to like arouse yourself, stir yourself up. So that's the verb. Initially with your body. And I think what he's talking about here is this very famous motion that we all know that only Jews do. Well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe others do this as well. I don't think it has to be shuckling in this way, clearly, but he's saying, he really is talking about, as it becomes very clear in the last line of this teaching, he's talking about moving your body in such a way that you can really try to, I think, focus your mind. And I believe what this is about. I once heard somebody say that shuckling is about it's like you're trying to shake attachments off of your body. It's like, it's as though if you could imagine like my desire for ice cream or my hunger or my thought about that cool car out there, like these are all like attached to my body as if that's the case. And in doing this, I'm like shaking them free so I can just focus my mind. So, we do this not just because we want to look like we're really traditional and really hip to the Jewish tradition. We want everyone to know how from we are. There's a real reason for bodily movements in tefillah. And it's an exercise. I don't want to call it in and of itself a form of meditation. It's a tool that's part of, for want of a better term, Jewish meditation. And when we do what we're trying to do is to clarify our thoughts, or to almost negate our thoughts with this kind of bodily movement. And how do we know that's what he's talking about? Because the last line afterwards, you'll be able to do avodah, that means prayer, literally divine service, just in thought without moving your body. Okay. And there, I don't think he's saying that the goal is to stop moving your body, but I think he's saying like moving our body is a tool we use so we can get into the point where we're just cleaving to God. Does that resonate with people? Does that seem like a thing that you could use? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Brad?
Sorry. No, it doesn't. but I mean, I'm wondering if maybe something like, for instance, numerology and an understanding of that is a pathway to this understanding.
I don't know. I'm not sure what to say about that. I think he's opened all kinds of pathways, but I think here he's talking about, look, here you are, you're a being in a body. And by the way, he's one of the beautiful artistic things here. Who is this actually? This is, sorry. One of the beautiful things about this teaching is that it's not clear. It's just from the collection of the Baal Shem Tov's teachings. It doesn't say here who it is. Is he's playing with this idea that the word is a physical thing, like the word is the body, and you are a body. And so initially you cleave to the body of the word. Was that what the phrase was? Whoops. Yeah, you cleave to the body of the word, right? So, it's a very sophisticated teaching because it wants us to see, like, just as the challenge is to look at the word and move beyond it, I think he's also saying you are in a body and you need to move beyond it. So whether, there are other channels in numerology, I'm not saying no, but this teaching, I think, is about the problem of embodiedness in prayer and distraction, katnut, restricted consciousness, distractions, whatever they may be. Those are a function of being in a body, right? Of being this particular expression of the divine that's embodied in this particular form. And the question is, how do I transcend from this body to return to my source, right? How do I cleave this mind and this soul and this consciousness with the great oneness that is connecting all things. To do that, I have to kind of overcome my body, right? I have to get past the point where my body and my ego are distracting me. And so he's suggesting here bodily movements actually help you do that. And he's connecting that to the body, the idea of the focusing initially on the body of the word, then you can overcome your body and you can overcome the specific meaning of that word. So then we're back into this idea that he introduced in chapter 1. So I know I didn't directly answer your question, but I just say I don't think that's what he's talking about here. Okay. There's a million things we didn't get to. Let me just open it up for a couple of minutes for people to raise questions, comments, ask about whether something we talked about here, something we didn't talk about here, if you want to say anything or ask anything. Yeah.
I find it really encouraging that the Baal Shem Tov spends so much time talking about missing the mark. Like
Right.
Everybody's got to pray with kavanah, and obviously you're not going to get it every time. And this is what you do when you don't get it. It's encouraging that even the Baal Shem Tov understands about not quite getting there.
Yeah, I mean, I would, that's exactly right. I would put it even more strongly than that. It's not just even the Baal Shem Tov. Like, you don't compile a book like this unless you have enough teachings that are about, essentially the implicit message is, man, prayer is hard. It is really hard to cleave to the Creator. Here's 10,000 tools that I've developed and that I've had to work on. He himself is clearly a person who understood that tefillah is difficult and that, or meditation is difficult. That's what this is all about.
I never made the connection before between prayer and meditation. They've always seemed like such separate practices to me. And here it's so clear, like when he says, if it isn't working for you, or if you're not in the place where you can springboard up, then just focus on the word.
Yeah.
That's just what meditation teachers say. If if
Right.
you're not ready to leap forward, then just focus on the breath and just think about the breath, and in the very physical aspect of the breath too, like every bit of your windpipe. And I seems like I've gotten to a very ripe old age without ever having thought of those that's insane before.
Well, one thing, I mean, look, it might be a little bit, I do stand by it because I think it's a useful framework. It might be a little bit intellectually sloppy for me to say that, to say there's not a distinction between prayer and meditation. But if we understand meditation in the broader sense of like trying to transcend our ordinary way of thinking to connect to something, then prayer is a form of meditation. But good, I'm glad. I'm glad. Yeah, we don't usually think of prayer in that way. One of the reasons, by the way, is because the word prayer doesn't capture in English doesn't capture what the word prayer is about. So let me share now something with you. Whoops. You're looking now, I think you should be looking at the Jastrow dictionary. You all looking at that?
No? Oh, no, there's English there.
Yeah, so down here is Pei Lamed Lamed. So sorry, the Jastrow dictionary is a dictionary that is, it's mostly a dictionary of like rabbinic era Hebrew. I think Marcus Jastrow called it Dictionary of the Targumim, which means Aramaic translations, Talmud, and Midrashic literature. It's post-biblical Hebrew. And so the word,
magnify that as big as you can possibly get.
Oh yeah, they have this cool thing that sometimes doesn't work.
Woo-hoo.
Okay. So palal means what? So I mean, it's multivalent, and every part of the meaning of this gives you a different insight into what prayer might mean. To be really clear, the plain meaning of the word tefillah, right? Tefillah comes from this root. It clearly means to pray. It clearly means, in its simplest level, to say the words of the prayer. That I'm not disputing that, but I'm just suggesting that the English word pray doesn't capture everything that's in the verb. So let me just go to the next page. Now this is where things get weird with this tool. Oh, good. It's still working. I think it's still working. No, it's not. Hold on. So, yeah, this next page. Hold on, previous page. What happened? Okay, let me just make sure I'm not missing any pages. Okay, yeah, so we saw the first page. Next page is, so then you get to, this is the easier way to do it. Okay, hit palel is where it becomes actually pray. So the word tefillah is a variation of that. But it also means to argue or to debate. And there is another meaning that I'm not, oh, well, there is one of the meanings of the word palal, why am I not seeing it here, is it can also mean to judge.
I think that was on the first page.
Oh, it was, okay. Okay, so hold on, thank you. I'm glad one of us is paying attention. To arbitrate, to intercede. Yeah, so to arbitrate, I guess that's the one, it's sometimes translated as to judge. And while clearly meditation is not judgment, if you imagine what's happening is in a judgment is that somebody is stepping outside of the situation to, kind of get outside of the immediacy of the situation and make an evaluation of it. In some way, prayer has this sense of like self-judgment or self-evaluation. I don't think that the sense of that is in terms of like moral evaluation, like, am I a good person? I don't think that is what we're after here. But the sense in looking at yourself, right? Looking at yourself in the broader context of being part of this larger unity and connection with God. I'm just saying that the word tefillah in English, in Hebrew, is more open to a bunch of different interpretations than the word prayer. And I think sometimes we have trouble with prayer because we're using the English word prayer and we're not thinking about what it really means. And we're also not thinking about it in terms of how it's used and what happens in the Torah, right? Whether there's characters who are using the word tefillah, or whether we're just talking about situations in which the avot are doing what we would now recognize as prayer. When we start looking at that, it opens up the possibilities, right? When Abraham is communicating with God, he's not reading the Shema and the V'ahavta and reciting Musaf, right? He's communicating with God in a direct and immediate way. And, especially in this week's Torah portion, I mean, you really have a sense of Yaakov's continual struggle to transcend his own life and to get a broader perspective. So the word prayer doesn't draw on any of those images that are part of our tradition. Other thoughts? Okay. So what I want to say is, where are my notes here? Okay, so I want to ask people to read chapter 3, and then I need your guidance. Do we want to try to do more than one chapter? Because no, it's okay. 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 All right. It sounds like everybody agrees that one chapter is good because
Why don't we see if we ever finish one chapter in the course of a class?
You mean to try to do every single teaching within a chapter? Yeah. Well, I don't. That's never my aim, and especially in the second chapter, there's a whole bunch of teachings, 20, 21, that I don't know, that I felt like were less useful for our practical prayer. So I'm always going to be skipping around. Okay, well then great. So let's do chapter 3. And then after that, I don't think we're going to read chapter 4 together, and we're going to read half of chapter 5, but and onward for that. You can certainly read chapter 4 if you want to, but for next time, let's just do chapter 3. Thanks all. Take care.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
And to you.